We are live in all the places. So I was going to talk about something else today. However, one of you ended up writing me a really lovely DM and wanted me to talk about developing a healthy body image in your children. And I say children, hers was specifically a daughter, but this is important for sons as well. We are live in all the places. So if you see me kind of looking in different areas. So today I'm going to talk about that. How do we develop a healthy body image in our kids? And if you saw my post yesterday, I will say that the place that this starts, developing a healthy body image in your child, starts with developing a healthy body image in yourself. And I think that's the one thing that people don't want to hear. And usually that has to do with the fact that they're struggling to feel confident, comfortable, even just okay in their own body, and hoping that they don't pass that on to their child. But let's talk about how that works. So forget about body image or weight for a minute. Let's talk about how our children learn anything from us. And truly, in my post yesterday, I mentioned that it's our energy and our vibration that speaks first. So when we're teaching anything to our kids, let's talk about money. If we're teaching our kids how to feel about money or how to have a healthy relationship with money, they're learning from our energy, our vibration, our relationship with money. So it's less about what we say. It's less about what we think are teachable moments, where something comes up about money and something comes out of our mouth and we teach them, oh, this is why it's important to save or something like that. That happens and those teachable moments are good. But where they're really picking up on learning about a healthy relationship with money is who we are every day. So the things that we say, how we talk about money, what happens when a bill arrives, what happens when they ask us for something at at Target or the grocery store or something, how do we respond? It's the day-to-day moments in our relationship with the money that ends up teaching them how we feel about money, which is the thing that teaches them what they might want to feel about money. This is how all beliefs and identity are formed for children. And it's not just the parents. So I'll talk about that in a second. It's not just the environment within the home. It's every environment that the kids are in. But it starts with us. So bringing it back to a healthy body image, it's less about what you do or don't say to your child about their body or food. It's about who you are with your own body and food, right? So we think it's about, so let me bring this into a tangible example. In my practice, when I go through the food story and the weight story with each of my clients, anecdotally, I'll call it 80% of my clients will be able to trace their struggles with food and body and weight back to messages, belief systems, and identity that were formed in early childhood about what was good and bad about bodies and food and weight, right? And this is no fault of parenting. It's not meant to blame. It's not meant to, if you are currently a parent and struggling to help foster a healthy body image or relationship with food with your children, this is not meant to blame parents in any way, but it is an invitation for us to be more aware and more intentional with who we are, not only in ourselves, but also how we speak about how we feel about things in front of our children. So for instance, when I'm talking with my clients about where their body image struggles started and when can they first remember struggling with their body, inevitably it goes back to some message, some belief that was formed about what is good or what is bad, what makes a body good, what makes a body bad, what makes a food good, what makes a food bad. I'm going to use sort of quotation marks there because those things, of course, aren't actually true, but they are beliefs that are formed, right? And so as a parent, it's important to understand that it's not so much what you directly say to your child as in, you are good or bad, or the food is good or bad. It is how you are. It's how you show up in the world around food. So if you're cooking dinner and your child is coloring in the corner and your husband walks in with the wrong kind of cheese or something like that, and you're saying, I don't eat that. That is bad for us. Why didn't you get this kind? I'm supposed to have low fat. This is terrible for me, right? And you start talking to him about that. Your child is picking up on, oh, mom really cares about food and whether or not it's good or bad for her, and whether or not there's a right kind or a wrong kind, right? These are some examples. Or if you're in a department store and you're trying something on with your kiddo, and they're little, and so they have to be in there with you when you're trying it on, and you're pinching and prodding and, oh, this doesn't fit and I never fit into anything, and oh, that's frustrating. Or even, if I'm honest, if it's just your internal vibration, if it's just your internal energy that is self-deprecating or putting yourself down, or I don't feel comfortable in this, that vibe, that energy comes off of you, and your child is picking this up. Mom is uncomfortable with something, right? But even more so, if you're expressing that, if you're saying, I never look good in things, I can never fit into anything. Why does this always look this way on me? Oh, I hate how my thighs look in this. I hate how my da-da-da. And you're talking about yourself, but what your child is picking up on is there are good things or bad things about bodies in general, right? And then they end up saying, well, what's good or bad about mine? This is how they start to develop their questions and curiosity and the foundation for a healthy body image. So when we're talking about developing a healthy body image, I always go back to what example, what role model are you setting in your own, right? And I could do hours of training on that. I'll try to keep it brief for the sake of this video. We start with ourselves. We start with asking ourselves, who are we being? How are we showing up in our relationship with bodies, in our relationship with food? Do we make bodies an important piece of conversation that are in conversation in our child's everyday lives, good or bad? Some parents think, that there is that the way to manage that is to always say good things. Her body's beautiful. Her body's beautiful. Her body's beautiful. All that does is teach our children that there are bodies that are beautiful, and then when we don't say it, that are bodies that are not, right? And so we want to be careful that we don't overemphasize bodies, because in that way we're teaching them what is important and what is not. And so if I'm going to make this super tangible, people ask me all the time, because I do have now a 9-year-old, how do you handle it with her body image? And what I say is that we make bodies a part of the conversation, just like we make everything else, just like we make math and soccer and swimming and drawing and science. And it's not a taboo conversation, but it's also not overemphasized, because from our perspective, bodies are not overemphasized, right? They're all good and they all just are. So that's how we handle that with her, is that it's not that we include or exclude it. It's just another conversation. So then we go into the actual conversation. So this particular, when you asked me the question, she was asking in particular about how her daughter is noticing that other kids at school can eat quote unquote junk food and it doesn't impact them. And so reading between the lines without going too deep into her question, the inference is that perhaps her daughter is living in a larger or even slightly larger body than some of the other kids. And one of the ways that this mom is helping her with it is to make food choices that support her, right? And this is tricky, right? Because what is true is that there are all sizes of bodies, and that there are folks for whom food does not impact them one way or the other. And then there are folks for whom food does impact them. And what I will say is our first line of defense is to look at the food culture in the home, right? So are foods taboo? Are there certain foods that are off limits and on limits? And how do we talk about those foods? Are there foods that are demonized and foods that are moralized as better foods? And when we do that, not that there's anything wrong with that necessarily, but it makes the foods that they can't have much more desirable psychologically. So even if they don't really care about the food, as soon as we start saying, well, we can have this, but we can't have this, this becomes really big. Where can I get that? Who else is eating that? When do they get to eat it? Why do they get to eat it, but not me? And it starts to make it something where the food becomes much bigger than what it really is, which is just food, right? We start to put a sort of a moral label on it, and the food itself starts to become larger. And so how do we deal with that? How do we make that how do we make that something that is healthy for them? Because, if you know my work and you know me well enough, you know that I firmly believe that there are foods that will support your health and vitality, and there are foods that won't if we eat them consistently and only and regularly, right? So we can't just say that, all foods are the same and eat whatever you want. That's a whole different conversation that we will get into in another one of these healthy conversations. But for now, when we're talking about kids, our jobs as parents is to help them make decisions that support them, right? Mentally, physically, and emotionally. And so one of the ways we do that is to teach balance. And we start to bring their awareness to how they feel after they eat certain foods, which foods are harder to stop eating and which foods are, easier to stop eating, and how can we support them in that. We start to teach balance. So food isn't good or bad. It just becomes, these are the types of foods that will help us feel like we have more energy. These are the foods that will help keep us full longer. These are the foods that will help us run faster on the soccer field or swim longer in the pool. These are the foods that'll help us stay awake. My daughter was telling me a story about how there's a kiddo in her classroom that keeps falling asleep. And she said to me, "Mom, do you think that it has to do with what he's eating?" And I said, "I don't know, honey. It could be that." And so she's asking me in the mornings, "Well, what food can I eat that will help me stay awake?" Okay, let's talk about that, right? And so it doesn't become foods are good or bad. It starts to become, what does our body do with certain foods? How does our body feel after we have certain foods? And if we can start directing them back to their own cues of when I'm hungry, when I'm full. My daughter, we just went through a round of what happens when she brings something in front of, if she has some screen time and she brings something in front of the screen time, and how she kind of zones out. We talked about that. And so she doesn't eat in front of the screen anymore because she zones out. And she says, "Mom, I can't tell when I'm full when I do that." Great. So let's the way that we manage that is that we don't eat that in front of the screen, so that you can hear when your belly's had enough and you can hear when you're full. And so I don't create hunger and fullness for her. I don't create when she's had enough or when she needs more, but I do create the environment for her to be able to hear her own hunger and fullness cues. I do create the environment for her to be able to pay attention and listen. Now I'm going to bring it back to ourselves again, because if you don't know your own hunger and fullness cues, and you don't know how to pay attention to when you've had enough, and you don't know which foods have you blow through those hunger and fullness cues and which ones allow you to do that naturally, then it's hard to provide that environment for your kiddos. There's another, and I think this mom was struggling with, they don't keep junk food, what she considers junk food, in the house. And that's okay. It's not, if that's not something that's in your family culture, I'm not going to ask you to go buy a bunch of junk food and put it in your house at all. And we do need to be aware of the conversation of the reasons why we don't keep it in our house, and how we can, and what type of messaging our kids are getting if we're saying this is bad food, that's why we don't have it, versus I trust you to create balance. I trust you to be able to know when you want to choose a food like this and how to be able to stop and realize that you've had enough. We need to help them create that balance, because if all we do is shut off access to junk food altogether, then again, it becomes this really big thing. Why can all of my friends have all of this junk food and I can't? They can't help but wonder what's wrong with me, right? What's wrong with me? Why can't I have that? Why can they and not me? And that's a dynamic that we want to avoid with food. To wrap this all up in a bow and try to make this a little bit more digestible. First, we want to evaluate our own relationship with food and body. If we are struggling and we don't have a healthy relationship with food and body within ourselves, then we are communicating that, whether consciously or unconsciously, we are communicating that, because we can't help but be who we are. And if we are someone that is struggling, or if we're uncomfortable, then we can't help but be that person to our child in any area of our life, not just food and body struggles. So we first look internally. Then we look at the types of messages that are coming out of our mouth, right? What do we say? Do we make bodies, do we overemphasize bodies, whether they are, quote, good or bad? What is the emphasis that we put on bodies in our lives? And we need to be careful about the language that we use and the way that we talk about bodies. Are they on a pedestal? Are they, do we talk about other people's bodies in front of them? Do we talk about our own bodies in front of them? And what kind of energy and messages are behind those? We want to be really careful about what comes out of our mouth. And we start talking about making food good or bad. And inevitably, if we start to make food good or bad, it automatically pushes our children in the direction of, well, if food is good or bad, and if this is bad food and I really like it, maybe there's something bad about me. If this is bad food and I can't have it, but other people can, then there's something bad about me. And they start to internalize these messages and start their own relationship with food that becomes not so healthy, and it doesn't feel so good for them. So we want to be careful about how we moralize food as good or bad. When I talk about teaching balance to kiddos, believe me, I've been teaching this for 20 years, and it's complicated. There are lots of layers to this, because if you know my work, you know that I'm a really big proponent of intentional eating, not intuitive eating, especially for kids, because the way that processed foods are designed, it bypasses their natural satiety cues. It bypasses their natural hunger and fullness cues. And our brains are designed in such a way that even if you see processed foods, it's triggering things in the mind, signaling you to eat it that is unnatural. So it's not the same as looking at an avocado when you're looking at Cheetos. It does a different thing in the brain. And so to rely on your child to be able to make a decision in their best interest, their brains aren't developed enough to do that. Their impulse control is not fully developed. Their ability for delayed satisfaction is not fully developed like ours are. And adults have a hard enough time with it. So it's not about bringing them back to their intuition so much as it is helping them to understand what happens to their bodies and their brains when they eat certain types of food. For instance, my daughter can very easily identify that when she starts eating goldfish, it's much harder to stop than when she starts eating an apple. She knows the difference between, when I eat goldfish, it's like I could eat the whole box. But when I eat an apple, I'm done halfway through. I know when I'm done, I can stop, because the way an apple is designed in nature, it has the right makeup of macronutrients to hit your body's natural satiety cues. It tells you when to stop. Goldfish bypasses those cues. And so it's harder for her to know when she's had enough goldfish. So I help her, not by not allowing her to have goldfish, but I help her by, here's here's a bowl, right? Here you are with the goldfish, and she takes it and she goes to eat it. And then if she wants more, we check in. Are you still hungry? How does your tummy feel? And 9 times out of 10, A, she doesn't even finish the bowl, and B, she'll say, no, I'm not hungry, I don't need anything else, right? So it's not so much that we make foods good or bad, but we help them with the foods that are bypassing their triggers. Because with 44,000 products on the shelf, most of them being highly processed in some way, we're bypassing the natural satiety cues for kids all the time. And it's harder for them to manage. It's hard for them to manage those foods. It's hard for adults to manage those foods. Imagine what it's like for a kid. So it becomes less about can I have it and can't I have it? Is it good for me? Is it bad for me? And it becomes more about teaching them to pay attention to which foods are harder to understand when to stop, and harder to understand if I'm full, right? And those are the cues that we help them develop in a healthy way. All right, just checking to see if you had any questions over here. Perfect, we're all good over there. We're good over here. Hey, everyone in there, thanks for joining. Okay, so if you have any questions for Healthy Conversations next week, there's all kinds of ways to submit your questions to me, and I would be happy to answer them for you. Healthy Conversations are happening on Wednesdays. I think I'm going to change them to Thursdays, but I'll let you know when that happens. I will see you next time.